Hello, and welcome to Stories Across Borders. Here we discuss stories told across a range of different mediums: books, movies, games, you name it. The only rule is that we can only discuss these things in terms of the writing. Anything like animation, acting, mechanics, all of that is off limits unless it directly relates to how the story is being told. I'm Daniel Radford, author, Apartment Block, and also your host, and today I'm joined once more by John Kernan as we continue our cycle on coming-of-age stories.
Yeah, I'm a Ferris wheel.
If that didn't clue you in, which to be fair, it might not have, depending on where in our audience you fall, today in particular we're discussing the animated film Drifting Home, written by Hiroyasu Ishida, Hayashi Mori, and Minaka Sakamoto. You can find that both subbed and dubbed on Netflix. The movie itself is about a group of children, all aged around like 11 years old, good at words today, who find themselves transported to a mystical ocean in an old crumbling apartment block set to be demolished, sort of floating on this building in the middle of the water, no land in sight. And they have to sort of survive this situation as they slowly, drift home.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah, that's already wild, but here's the thing, that's not what the movie is actually about. The movie is actually about growing up, and in a variety of different ways. The predominant way that this theme sort of appears in Drifting Home is with the idea of accepting the progress of time and the change it brings, and learning to use lessons from the past without being chained to the past itself. Something we discussed a fair bit in the sort of broader episode prior to this one.
Yeah, it's kind of funny too because it's I think this movie does a really good job shining a light on just how much kids really can still have to let go of before they move forward. Because think of like a lot of times it's easy to think of moving on from the past as something for older people to deal with. But here we see even these young kids being essentially chained to their current lives by everything they've been through and not being able to properly move forward until they can let go without it tearing them apart.
Well, the thing, like, that's what you said. Like, it's a vibe we usually associate with like traumatized adult characters, or at the very least, like teens, 20s, right? But it's an important lesson to learn at a younger age as well, especially because up to a point, it never really occurs to you that everything is transient when you're particularly young, unless you've had like a really troubled life. And then at some point, it's going to hit you that, oh, none of this is forever. And that can be hard to deal with. It's a hard thing to swallow that this routine, this comfortable, safe life you've been a part of isn't going to be forever. I think for a lot of people when that hits is like that sort of transition from primary school, what you guys would call elementary school, into like middle school and high school. I think that's like the
Yeah,
big first time it hits a lot of people. Or if you happen to have like a beloved pet that dies would be another one that can trigger that one a lot. Or a relative that's
I
relevant
think
to
it's
this.
funny too because each kid we're looking at here has to learn it in a different way, and specifically our main two characters, Kosuke and I can't believe I'm forgetting her name
Natsume.
suddenly. Um, yeah, Kosuke and Natsume have to learn it in a actual completely different, almost even opposite way from everybody else because they already lost the couple things that were most important and precious to both of them that allowed them to have their like safe innocence, everything is fine, nothing needs to change. They just haven't been able to fully accept it and move on from it yet. It's already gone. They're just not even close to over it.
Yeah, I mean it's a hard thing to swallow as a lesson, right? And you touched on something else that's important to this is that every to varying degrees, admittedly, but every kid in this movie, which is all the major characters, all have growing up to do and lessons to learn. It's not just this one lesson. This movie is all about the process of growing up.
Yep. Each one's got something different going on. We've got what Tai Chi's our little one. He doesn't really take anything seriously or attach himself to anything, but he cares about his friends a lot. Being there for them is what leads to him finally like manning up and actually like doing things, whereas before he's never been anything but a goofball who played around and didn't really emotionally invest himself in like anything, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, I mean to go through it right. Other than the major premise, the major lesson of the movie, there's also learning how to be vulnerable and when you reaching out for help because that's important growing up. There's becoming less self-centered. There's finding healthy ways to express your feelings and to process them, especially processing things like grief and guilt, learning to stand up for yourself, learning how to cooperate and work as a team and put differences aside when the situation demands it. uh,
Being ready to give your best to take care of others, especially if it's like living up to responsibility. I forget his name, but like big kid, he's got a bunch of siblings. I think he's the oldest.
I don't think he's the oldest because I think it looked like in that sort of like flashbacky sequence. I think there was a couple. At least one looked like it was a like an older sister or something from memory.
Shouldn't assume just because he's big.
You know, learning the difference between being mature and projecting maturity. Lots of different ways, and each of the characters represents this theme of growing up or interacts with different aspects of it. That list isn't all like just Kosuke and Natsume, our two main characters. These things are spread across the cast, and mostly it's pretty relevant. I was thinking a good way to handle this episode, actually, at least to start with, and we'll see how we go from there, might actually be go through it character by character,
That's fair,
because
yeah.
they all interact with the theme slightly, like that theme of growing up, the idea of coming of age, slightly differently.
Eventually we'll get to Nobo.
He's third on my list, actually. Uh, I wrote some notes before this one because the way the themes are all meshed together is quite complicated, and I wanted to make sure I did it justice.
Oh yeah. And I mean, he's one of the most complicated parts of it, that's for sure.
Yeah, despite having a very simple attitude, his role in the story is very complicated. But I think the person I want to start with is actually Natsume. Natsume. I'm not good at pronouncing Japanese names, unfortunately.
You're pronouncing it fine. I wonder how good the translation was on Kosuke is the one I'm unsure of because
Oh, I
I don't
watched
know
it.
if maybe
I watched it subbed, and I think we're pretty close.
that's why I'm thrown off because I don't know if it's a valid way to say it or not. But in the dub, everybody kept putting like emphasis almost on the U in his name, which I would expect to be like silent. Everybody kept saying Kosuke, and every time it happened, I twitched.
Yeah, I feel like uh, I think they do something similar with that sort of UKE sound that Australians do with a lot of pronunciations, where they just plow through pretty quickly usually, so you don't really hear it.
Yeah, I don't
Uh,
like. I don't expect to hear. Anytime I see UKE at the end or sometimes even in the middle of a Japanese name's like English spelling, I expect not to hear the U. I expect it to be something that is like the tiniest little millisecond of part of a syllable.
yeah. To be fair, like it could also be a regional thing, depending on like where the voice actors were from or how they learned to pronounce the words. Depending, I don't know. I don't know that much about the language. I just enjoy their media.
The only one who's free of sin is ironically Bryce Papenbrook because he got to voice Kosuke, so he never had to say the name. Damn you, Kirito.
like like 10 minutes in, we've already broken the rule about only talk about the right.
Ah. No, it's okay. We're talking about the writing.
They wrote the name
They,
sometimes in the script.
yeah. How did it get there?
Okay, so Natsume.
Natsume.
She is the lead female character in this story. 11-year-old girl, because they're all 11 or thereabouts. And her main thing is that she feels very lonely and abandoned. Her parents had a toxic marriage and were fighting constantly. They were very abusive toward each other. They eventually divorced, and she was left alone with her mother, who was really struggling to function as a parent. The only person who really acted as a proper parental figure for her was actually Kosuke's grandfather. And prior to the beginning of this movie, fairly recently, he died. And on top of that, the place where both of their families lived, him included, is now set to be demolished. This like happy place to her, the one happy place. So she feels very isolated, and like there is no place for her in the world. Something which Kosuke has inadvertently made worse through some of his actions as well. I don't know if you want to touch on that in his segment or on or now, but as a
There are a few
general,
things we could say about it.
yeah. So
I mean, he's kind of his bitterness about everything he's lost has kind of led to the opposite of him trying extra hard and too much to thoroughly let go of everything that he sees as over, which has led to him being cold and distant and sometimes just straight up mean to her because she's a part of that painful, much happier past he's
yeah,
trying to move on from, and he's going about it all wrong.
sort of. That's definitely a part of it, and that's definitely not making things easier for her because she was already feeling like she didn't really have a place where she belonged, or like she had value as a person, because everyone in her life has either left her or made her feel like she was a burden to them. Sometimes both. To the point, like, you look at her and you see how recklessly she acts at parts of this movie, and consider that how often she was just sitting in this falling down building, and you're like, you really didn't put much value on your own safety in life at this point, and were dangerously close to going to some very bad places.
Yeah, she can't let go of the only place where she's felt safe and happy and like part of a family.
Yeah, she clings desperately to the memories of those happier times. Desperately. And as a result, is sinking her chances of finding joy in the present. So,
Yeah. She's putting herself on an island and letting herself sink.
symbolism. Yeah, so honestly, even though I feel like the movie gives us largely not to be fair, it is more of an ensemble thing. They're just the two main characters. I do think it leans slightly towards showing us through Kosuke's lens, but I think Natsume's character arc is the most central to the overarching theme in the movie.
And I would say the main plot.
Yeah, certainly. And like, it's rough. She's gone through a lot of stuff for the age she is. Like, not the worst things in the world. These are pretty mundane problems compared to, some of the things other people are going through. But they're still significant things, especially when you're a child.
Yeah, it's still really painful and also the kind of thing you expect somebody to have to deal with when they get older, not as a still pretty little kid.
Yeah, I mean, she's her family fell apart. Who knows where her dad is? He's just abandoned them, and her mum is wrapped up in her own world. She is not functioning well as an adult. Not the worst either. She's not like a massive drunk or a drug addict. She's not abandoning Natsume. She's just not functioning. She's struggling.
She's
She is not fulfilling all of her duties as well as she could.
she
And
is not present, she's just surviving.
half the time, Natsume has to take care of her, it looks like, with the little bits we see of them together. It's a lot. That on its own, depending on the kid, can already be pretty rough to deal with. Some kids are fine with a divorce, but Others, it really does have an effect on them, especially when it was clearly a very toxic environment leading up to it to begin with. It's given her a very warped perspective to begin with. And the only normalcy she had, really, she lost when Kosuke's grandfather died. It's a lot to deal with. All of these feelings of abandonment and isolation and loss. So it's no wonder that she clings so much to those few happy memories, even if some of them are a little bit tainted. And there is physical symbolic manifestations of this in the movie, one of which being just the apartment itself. The fact that it is being demolished is like the final straw from her perspective. It's like saying, this is all over, there's nothing good left. Your place is gone.
Yeah,
Which,
and
Jesus.
it breaks her heart a little bit, especially while meeting a young man named Nobo who seems to live there.
Yeah. But I think to
But
fully contextualize some of Natsume's struggles, we do need to go into Kosuke as well, because those two, more than any of the other characters, are so intrinsically linked together and with Nopo.
oh yeah, they are the pair.
Yeah. So Kosuke obviously also lost his grandfather and has to deal with that. But his issues in some ways are less tied to the loss and more tied to how he acted around that. Because around that time, it was obviously an emotional time for him. He loved his grandfather and cared about him a lot, and that made him very emotional around the time of his grandfather's imminent death. When he wasn't dead yet, but it was going to happen. And part of that resulted in him sort of lashing out at Natsume at one point, because there was an element of jealousy, because this person who, his close friend, who isn't really part of their family, at least biologically, was effectively taking time that he could have had, and was sort of such an object, had such a close bond with his grandfather that it hurt him a little bit, and he was jealous. And at one point, he said, like, when they went to visit him, probably for the last time, in fact, it would have been for the last time, we know that for a fact, he sort of lashed out and sort of, said, you're not even really part of this family, or something like that. It's been a couple of weeks since I watched it, admittedly. I don't remember exactly what he said. And Natsume kind of, it breaks her a bit, and she runs off, and his grandfather like throws the door open and is like, what the fuck, man, go after her, fix this. Because of course, as an adult, he understands how messed up that was.
Well, and besides that, also, like, it's just wrong. It's not even true.
I
They
mean,
are a family.
yes, that as well, but it is 100% just not accurate. But also, he knows, because he has effectively been her parental figure. It's not said outright in the story, but you can
He
assume.
knows there's a reason she's there all the
Yeah,
time.
he understands, because he's one of the only people she lets herself be. In fact, the only person really she lets herself be open with about her feelings.
And the only person she lets herself be a child with.
Exactly. So Kosuke, panics and runs off after Natsume, and because of what he did, and because he has to do this, he effectively costs both of them a chance to actually say goodbye, because whilst he's chasing after Natsume, his grandfather dies. And in the end, I don't think he ever really properly apologizes to her about that at that moment. And basically, or through this movie, he's dealing with processing all of that, because he knows he did the wrong thing, but he can't bring himself to really apologize because of his pride and his jealousy and his inability to properly deal with his own feelings
Yeah.
of guilt and grief.
Whereas we have Natsume running away from reality. Um, we've got we've got Kosuke die we've got Kosuke attempting to dive so headfirst into reality that all he's actually doing is running away from his feelings. And in the process of not facing and processing his feelings, they're leaking out in toxic ways, like him becoming a little loner edgelord, running away from all the people who care about him and just trying to sulk and be mad all the time.
Yeah, both of them in their own ways are not not healthily processing either their grief at this wonderful man's loss, or the loss of that man, I should say, as well as the things that happened around that and their feelings around that, and all that compiles, and they are both dealing with this in very unhealthy ways. And that, as I know you've been very eager to get into, is where Noppo comes in, this mysterious child who claims to have lived in this building forever, even though no one has ever met him up until Natsume did eventually, prior to the beginning of this movie. She'd hung around him a little bit up to this point. We're gonna get into some
I,
spoiler territory now. It won't kill the movie for you if you hear it, but
but hey, now's your
fair
chance.
warning.
You could go watch it right now and then finish this episode if you haven't. Not
So
a super long movie. It's pretty good.
that's 2
It's on
hours actually.
Netflix, and I'm sure plenty of other things. It's,
It is
it's average length.
reasonably long for a movie. It's not like
But
Lord of the Rings, but
you mean Lord of the Cutting Room Floor? Sorry. Um, but yeah, no, Nobo is. I like Nobo a lot as a character because he's the one character who, although still being wrapped up obviously very heavily with the themes of the story and what everybody else is going through, is not only going completely through his own unique thing, but touches on some other themes and ideas I know are definitely pretty popular in Japan that I've always been really interested
yeah.
in that have nothing to do with what all the other kids are going through and most of what the movie talks about
Nopo has everything and nothing to do with that theme.
in the most
Yeah.
interesting kind of way.
So there's a thing in certain aspects of like a couple of Eastern cultures, to be fair, but Japan specifically, obviously, certain like religions or spiritual beliefs have this thing where they believe that inanimate objects can have spirits, be those the actual spirit of the object or like a guardian.
And
Usually, I lean
especially
towards the spirit of
places.
the object. Yeah, places too. And Nopo is effectively the spirit of the soon to be demolished apartment building.
Yeah, he's almost like not just a living manifestation of the building, but of the memories of that building that everybody who lived in it share.
Exactly. Nopo effect like as this spirit represents home. He represents that this building was home to generations of people, that there is generations of memory attached to this place, good, bad, and in between. And narratively, he is the sort of physical, despite being a unifier in a lot of ways, and the sort of cool head of the group in a lot of ways, he also, to a degree, represents the problems between Natsume and Kosuke, as well as the things that bind them. He is both the things that unify them and the things that divide them apart, because those are effectively the same things.
And the main reason they are here alongside Natsume.
That too. It's the movie is very wishy-washy about how that part of things actually works, but it's definitely tied to his existence. And
I I mean, it was real enough for Friend Girl to still have those bandages. I know that much.
yeah,
Don't know
it
where she
definitely wasn't
fell
a
if it
dream.
wasn't in that building.
It definitely wasn't a dream. It was real. It's just how the mechanics of it aren't
We
clear.
don't know how real.
Yeah. But yeah, so because of what he is basically, as a narrative physical representation of all this stuff, basically Natsume finds herself latching onto him and becoming withdrawn from others. It is very symbolic of how she sort of clings to those happy memories, and specifically clings to that location as the embodiment of those memories. Meanwhile, Kosuke is quite rude to him, he doesn't really trust him, and he struggles to get along with him despite the fact he knows he's a good person, because of his jealousy of the easy, comfortable friendship and trust he has with Natsume that he is broken himself, and his inability to confront his own personal problems and the fact that he broke that. So he distances himself from Natsume, the same, not from Natsume, oh yes, from Natsume, but from Nobo, in the same way he is just trying to distance himself from his grief and the past as they relate to each other. And it's a really interesting and really cool bit of symbolism, and I like how it ties into the culture of it all, this idea of putting a physical, sentient representation of the problem that the actual two main characters are facing in there, because they can interact with it directly.
Yeah, because yeah, actually symbolically, yeah, it really does fit because in a way he is from the beginning of the movie. Kosuke is he's treating Nobo the same way he's treating the apartment building and those memories. He's trying
He
he's
doesn't want anything to
trying
do with it,
not
yeah.
to acknowledge it, and he also is bothered by Natsume's attachment to it and refusal to let go.
Yeah. Nopo isn't just a ghost, he is the apartment building. That's how that
Yeah,
works, that idea of being the spirit of it. That they are the
thematically,
same.
literally, and metaphorically.
Yeah, which is so cool. Like, as a narrative device. I love that. And the way and because of that, the way they interact with Nopo is a sign of their emotional development through the movie. He encourages Natsume to be more open, to interact with the others more, to be a team player. You know, he kind of comes out and gets the group together and things like that. So the more you see her interacting with others as well as just him, it's a sign that she is growing past her problems. At the same token, the more you see Kosuke being nicer and more kind to Noppo and interacting more with him, the more he is coming to terms with the fact he has to deal with the shit he's trying to leave behind. It's great.
Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, it's easy enough to figure out the bulk of it pretty early on in the story, but it still feels nice and really wholesome when we get that confirmation too near the end. When it becomes extremely obvious without getting to the point where they've actually told each other is when we see Ferris wheel girl. There's no denying it by that point because why else would there be this girl who's got the same thing going on as Nobo and can't leave the Ferris wheel.
Well, yeah, because that's the thing as well. Like, the apartment block isn't the only building that we see floating around in this ocean. We see other places tied to the community, to the home that these kids have come from. And it actually is really neat because it provides like a lot of tension to the survival aspect as well as the symbolism of the whole thing. Because sometimes when these places are floating by, that's their chance to try and hop across to explore and look for supplies, and but then they have to get back in time. Otherwise, they'll be stuck there. And that's really cool because it simultaneously is great for the tension of the survival element of the story, but it's also more symbolism. They have to, they have to interact with their past, where they are from, and the history and the feelings associated with those memories. But they can't dwell in them for too long. They have to move back to the present, or they're going to get left behind.
You have to take time away from what's going on to breathe, collect yourself, get a little bit of air so that you can continue to heal or re-energize or whatever, but at some point you've got to come back
Yeah,
to reality or
those
else because the world's not going to stop moving.
yeah, those fragments of the past are vital to their survival. They're incredibly important to them, but they can't stay there, or they're going to lose everyone else and be isolated forever. It's really good symbolism and ties perfectly into that message again. That idea that part of growing up is learning to accept that things are transient and that everything changes with time, and that it's okay to feel sad about these things. In fact, you have to process these things. You can't try and forget where you came from. It's not healthy either. You have to interact with that, but you can't let it consume you. It's a wonderful, like, repeated message that is told both through the very explicit nature of the story, and then there's all this like implicit symbolism going on that if you stop and think about, oh shit, that makes sense. It's great. I love that. I love this idea of like what they do with the environment being a microcosm to the main theme of the story, to Nopo being a physical embodiment that can be directly interacted with, representing the things that are both troubling the main characters and that connect them. And then,
Yeah,
of course,
it's
there's
nice.
just the
And
story itself.
I guess you could say, in a way, he's also a manifestation of their feelings to a point too, directly, because not only is he there to interact with, he doesn't want to let go of them either.
No,
He's part of what brought them here.
because it's all tied together. You know, your past makes you who you are.
Yeah.
He is a part of them just as much as the building is a part of them. You know, the actual history. Because that's what he represents. That's what he is. He is integral to their getting through this, because he is the embodiment of their lives up to a point. But moving down the list a little bit, because we can come back to them later, obviously, because they're the main part of them. Like it's their movie, but I do want to touch on the other characters a little bit as well, because they all have their own sort of, well, some more than others, but they all have their own parts to play as well in this. And there are 4 other characters present in this movie, really. The next sort of most obvious, most present is Raina. Raina is a child we've all met. She's very self-absorbed. She thinks primarily of herself and not about how her actions might affect those around her. She's got this intense puppy crush on Kosuke, which she struggles to express in a remotely healthy way, because young love do be like that. And she clearly wants to have things her way and be seen as someone special by the people she cares about.
We get the idea that she's also at least a little bit just regularly spoiled because she seems to get to go on yearly, if not regular trips to what sounds like this world's equivalent to Disneyland. Like,
Yeah,
or actually not even Disneyland. I think it's Disney World because she makes it sound like a big trip.
I mean, they say where it is. I think she says it's in, like, is it California or is it LA?
So then, yeah, it's got to be the equivalent of Disney
Wait,
World because there's
one
only
of
the
those is a
one
city,
Disney
one of
World.
those is a state, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, she don't worry. She's just going
Uh,
to San Francisco.
America Land. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because whilst it's implied she's financially spoiled, I mean, it's not even implied. She clearly is. She's going on these trips all the time. And they're like, yeah, you can bring a friend
Yeah, why not? We'll pay for another ticket.
to come to another continent for a while and pay for more ticket to the amusement park for a while. But I think it is also kind of implied that despite the financial spoiling, there's distance there as well. Like, that's the impression I got from the stuff toward the end, is that there's
Very
a,
common with financially spoiled kids, unfortunately.
yeah, I get this feeling that between her attitude and her like clear need for attention and affection and the financial spoiling, I think that she's being given money when what she really needs is affection and attention.
Yeah,
It's like slightly
she seems
implied that there's like,
starved.
yeah, that there's not like parental abandonment necessarily, but a parental distance.
Yeah, and an undeniable one that never really seems
And
to get any closer, which would also partially explain why why not only the emotional attachments, but also the trip she can't shut up about is such a big deal to her too, because she's
that's
going away with her parents.
Yeah, that's the one time that her family feels like a proper family, that she's getting that direct love and attention. That's why the Ferris wheel that we come across is so important to her, and it's pretty much implied that Ferris wheel Spirit Girl is basically her equivalent of Noppo. She's
And
the
why
embodiment of
also
this. Yeah,
so badly to bring Kosuke with her on her trip.
Indeed.
'Cause, like, her best friend is right there, and she's trying to bring the boy she likes instead.
Which, for the record, is fucked up. It's understandable.
Definitely.
We know what it's like at that age and things like that. The fact that it's understandable doesn't change the fact that it is unintentionally something that's probably pretty hurtful.
Yeah, especially considering Kosuke and her have never been that close. They haven't
No.
talked that much, and he's
Really
actively
trying.
annoyed
Yeah, he's like
by her
actively.
affection while, I feel bad
Jury.
for getting her name. Juri, that's right, is
Yeah.
just sitting
Always in her
there
corner.
being quietly supportive, always being there with her, always knowing what's going on and on her side, and I'm sure understands why she's doing it, but must also feel a little bit of, "Oh, well, I mean, I'm right here. I wanna go. I like being around you."
I mean, yeah, we'll get into jury as well in a second because I do. I honestly, I wish they had paid more attention to Raina's story. Like, it's not her movie. It couldn't have been the focus. I get it. But there's like an implied second movie in there where you could have retold this whole experience from her perspective and it would have been almost as compelling.
Reina could have been the main character of
I,
almost the same story. Yeah.
and it's a shame. Like she's a little obnoxious, but she's also a very interesting and understandable character. And
Yeah.
it's a shame that that her issue didn't get a bit more focus because it also would have made the stuff with Ferris Wheel Girl's sudden appearance at the end feel a little bit better too. I would have really liked to see more of her journey than just her sort of situation with Jury. Like the one moment it kind of came to a head when she had that moment and was like, I should take you instead. Like you have been in my corner this whole time. I'm gonna take you. That was a big deal, but I wish there had been more build up toward that and towards the Ferris wheel girl.
Yeah. Although with the time they had, they definitely handled it well because despite being yelled at, I was actually kind of what finally shook her loose and allowed to see that is when when Jury finally went off on her for being an idiot and like doing all the things she was like.
Yeah, because Jury is interesting because she is definitely by far the most mature of the kids, right? But she still has plenty of room to grow herself. She's one of those kids who makes an effort to emulate maturity. And one of the things I like is that a sign that she does have some actual maturity in there is that she admits this early on. We see when she's like trying to give romantic advice to Raina about Kosuke. She's like, "Well, I mean, I don't actually know, but this is what my sister says."
Yeah.
And that's a good sign for that kid. That's a sign that she is actually maturing and is like a little bit further along in that path than the others. But by and large, she's still a child and she's still very soft spoken and she's still very timid in a way. Not like shaking in her boots timid, but she doesn't really stand up for herself or others. She's very much the quiet kid who sits in the corner a lot of the time. She kind of ends up enabling a lot of Raina's antics. And I think part of that is because she thinks she's being mature by being the quiet one to an extent, and not shouting or getting involved and things like that. But so her main arc is effectively learning to is not just try and embody this idea of maturity. It's learning when she has to stand up for herself and others instead of quietly sitting by and letting Raina go on her bullshit, and in doing so, acknowledging her own worth and expecting other people to acknowledge her worth. Because that's an aspect of growing up that people don't think about very often is self-worth and learning your worth as well as the worth of others. And I think that's kind of what Jury's version of growing up is here.
Yeah, Jury in a way is kind of just going from the incomplete and almost immature version of humility to what humility is actually supposed to be.
Yeah, it's this idea of not just projecting the idea of humility, but understanding that it's okay to express humility. It's a good attribute to have, but you can't let that prevent you from having what is yours effectively, for having your own place and being treated with respect.
Yeah, like I actually I can't remember what it was, but a video I watched recently touched on true humility, and like I think it incorporates Jury's arc, small as it is, really well, because I feel like a lot of people misunderstand humility. They think of being humble simply as like the absence of arrogance, but arrogance and humility, they're not light and dark. And I would almost say they're not even really like a yin and yang type of thing either. True humility is understanding your value, not over or underestimating it. And there are very, very few people who don't fall into one or the other, and a lot of people who somehow, despite the contrast, fall into both at the same time.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to portray yourself as humble and put up this very humble front whilst being internally very arrogant. God knows I've known a lot of people like that who people who don't know them are like, wow, they're so humble and kind. I'm like, that's because you've never spoken to them for more than an hour at a time.
Yeah, no, exactly. And like,
Jury's the opposite of that, where it's less. She overdoes the humble, to the point where she is not understanding her own value, and she's letting
yeah,
herself be walked all over and others be walked all over because she's not getting involved.
yeah, she comes to the real level of humility later, and also shakes off the apathy, because there's a little bit of that there before. It's a little bit of just floating along,
Yeah,
dealing
for
with the stuff
sure.
that's her problem with her friend and nothing more.
Not even really dealing with her own problems. It's very much like you said. It's apathy. It's this idea of she's just going with the flow and letting what happens happen instead of sticking up for herself or getting involved in things. And yeah, becoming more outgoing, more outspoken, more importantly, and a little bit more courageous is important. It's part of growing up, and it's her path to growing up. And like you said,
Yep.
her moment where that culminates is when Reina is kind of freaking out, being quite mean to Noppo, especially, and Jury just sort of turns around and basically says, "Yo, stop." She's not even like particularly aggressive about it, which is one of the things I like. Like she's forceful, but she's not screaming at her. She's not being really aggressive. She's not even like taking shots at her and being mean or cruel. She just is forceful and says, "This has to stop. You are not being fair. We are all in this situation, and we are not going to get out of it if you keep acting like this."
Yeah, it's
And
it's a
that's
nice it's a nice little moment for her.
her arc doesn't take up a lot of the movie, especially because she's unconscious for a chunk of it. But it's still an important arc, and that ability to stand your ground without being aggressive and volatile is an important aspect of maturity, I think.
I agree. It's one a lot of people don't reach. It's that one's actually a very
It's
delicate
hard.
middle ground that usually only tends to come with wisdom and time, and that's even for the people who ever get there at all.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's not easy to do that, especially as a kid. Like, especially as like an 11-year-old girl.
And not just
We've
that,
all known those. They're scary.
not only is it hard to get there in the first place, it's a lesson that's easily unlearned. Many people like shake back and forth between that difficult to balance little spot throughout their lives. Very rare is the person who can stay there resolute and truly understand who they are,
Yeah.
what their value is, and be ready to see the value in others consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I freely admit, like, I now, as an adult who is, not that far off of 30, I still struggle with some of that, I'm pretty confident in my own worth in a lot of ways and things like that, and I'm willing to stand up for myself. I'm definitely one of those people, though, who absolutely will take it too far. Not
Yeah.
necessarily the sense of arrogance, but in the sense of that I'm pretty good at not getting super like volatilely pissed these days. But when you get me to that point, God help you.
Yeah.
It's hard to do that, for sure, and it is a part of growing up. It's very important. It's a skill I wish more people focused on developing.
Yeah, and seeing an 11-year old pull it off, even if we don't know quite how long she's gonna hold on to that true humility is impressive.
Yeah. So our remaining two characters are Taishi and Yuzuru, and okay, look, I'm not gonna lie to you, they're kind of just there. Like, it's not that they don't have growth necessarily. Their main thing is kind of they have to focus on growing up in a more generalized sense. But I do want to touch on that idea, right? Because especially after just talking about Reina, who I feel like I wish she'd been given more focus and more space to explore her, because she actually had depth and layers that they didn't fully get to explore in the movie. Now, one of the bigger critiques that I've seen this movie get is pacing. Some stuff felt like it went on to, people sort of say it felt like some things were a little too long, whilst others were a little too short, and the ways like characters were allocated time in that limited window wasn't the most balanced or effective. I don't know if I agree with that, with those complaints to the same extent as some of the reviews I've seen or listened to or any of that, especially when I was researching for this to see what other people were saying, see if I'd missed anything. Pleased to say I haven't. In fact, I think we've gone into more detail than a lot of the people I've seen, to be honest.
Yeah.
How's that for some lack of humility for you? Uh, but I do agree with it to an extent. And I think Taishi and Yuzuru are the biggest offenders here.
They got nothing going on for the most part besides being supportive of everyone else.
Yeah, they kind of just make noise and fill space. And honestly, sometimes it feels like they just exist to keep the sort of gender balance equally split between the boys and girls of the group. Except that doesn't
Yeah.
actually check out because Noppo is technically male, so it's still slightly unbalanced, and you really didn't need two of them if that was your goal. And that's a stupid thing to be trying to do anyway, to be honest, in this day and
Yeah.
age. Uh,
Yuzuru is the gentle giant who never has a mean word to say about anybody, and is big, strong, do help task. And Taishi is the emotionally supportive, goofy little guy running around being silly all the time, and
so
that's for the most part the extent of how they get to express
right.
their characters.
I mean, I think even Yuzuru is kind of like is. I think he's even more of a flat character than Taishi, but they kind of fill the same role. And that's the thing. Like, if it was up to me, what I would have done is I would have made them. I would have merged them. Then,
I think Yuzuru becomes much less flat when we finally see the family bit, because even if one of those siblings might have been older than him, I think that really shows why he has the role in the group that he does. That's what he is in the family dynamic. He's the one, he wants everybody to stay together and be supportive of each other, and he can't stand seeing them
yeah,
fight
okay,
and not get
fair.
along and not agree what's going on. So he has like a compulsive need to mediate.
Yeah, they like you're definitely inferring a lot there. Like, it's valid, but I don't think the movie ever really expresses that. But I like what you're saying here. And here's my
It,
thoughts, right? I would have merged them into a single character and made the character arc Taishi to Yuzuru, especially as you perceive him.
oh yeah,
Have him
goofy little guy
start
who's got
as
to step
goofy,
up.
exactly. Have him, start off very goofy, very irresponsible, not really taking the situation and their survival seriously enough. Humor's good, cracking jokes is good, it helps you get through dark times, but there's a limit. And there's responsible ways to do that sort of thing, and you could have had him over time grow into being the way you perceive Yuzuru as the mediator, the guy who's just a constant support for everyone, the person who's using that sense of humor correctly now to lighten the mood at the correct times and being the more stoic support at other times when it's necessary. Make him the older sibling to two much younger siblings, and add Yuzuru as to an extent. And that also implies that he needs to step into that role to be a role model as part of his growing up. And I think that would have, especially with some reshuffling around to fix the pacing a bit, not only would have that made him just sort of like a semi-mirror to Jury a little bit, but it also would have been more compelling, would have made him feel more a part of the thematics and the narrative of the show, of the movie. And, it would have been one character there with something of a little arc instead of two characters that really didn't contribute that much. And I think that probably would have improved the movie and elevated a fair bit, as well as
Yeah,
making
they
more space for Raina, so we
spend a
could have
little bit too
probably
much
sort of
time just floating and having Kosuke and
Natsume.
God damn it, Natsume. I keep wanting to call her like Naname or something instead. I don't know why. It hits me right away, and I know it's the wrong name, but it's still what pops into my head. Um, they're running around doing their thing, but it's a thing they're still going to be doing for a big chunk of the movie, and that we aren't really diving into yet. When we could be establishing all of the characters and like not just their relationships, but what their roles are for the most part as part of the group. But instead, they're focusing a little too heavy on, in my opinion, the misdirect of them having to try to survive. It's good that it's there. We should be seeing them having to try to survive because we already covered like the metaphorical meaning and stuff that has to what they're going through, but that's also definitely something that is a big chunk of the movie and didn't need to be a big chunk of the movie to get the point across and to go to the message, or at least could have been more heavily integrated
I mean,
with the other characters to make them less of side characters and
yeah.
more of like the ensemble they're really meant to be.
Yeah, I think that's more what it is, right? I think the survival aspect needed to be there, partly because it broke up the segments of long dialogue, which makes it the movie feel a bit more dynamic, and partly because a lot of the survival stuff facilitated important character moments. So I do think it was done right. It was as important as it needed to be. How long certain survival segments went on in places maybe could have been tweaked for sure. But I mean, we do have to be realistic, right? This was a movie. It was a reasonably long movie. It was 2 hours as opposed to like the hour 40-ish that,
But
a
it's
lot of
still
movies
just a
are.
movie.
But it wasn't a particularly long movie either. It wasn't like a 3.5 hour movie. And it
Yeah.
wasn't Reina's movie or Taishi's movie or Nopo's movie even. It was very much a story about Natsume and Kosuke and their situation. And yes, there were things going on for the other characters, and they were reasonably layered, which I appreciate because it would have been very easy to tell this story and just had the other characters there to make things fill out more, to make it feel less quiet, or to have them in there and just not develop them and give them distinct personalities. So I'm glad that they were handled fairly well. But I do think that Reina was a missed opportunity in how she was handled. And I do think that having two characters who were just kind of filler to pad the numbers in a lot of ways, instead of having that one character who went on an arc from one to the other, like we talked about, was a misstep that made those characters less compelling than the one hypothetical character we talked about.
Yeah.
That being said, though, like, as a coming of age movie, this movie does achieve what it set out to achieve. Like, it completes its narrative journey quite well. Yes, the actual mystical nature of things is pretty poorly fleshed out beyond what Nopo and Ferris Wheel Girl actually are, and that does kind of irk me, but it's not really a huge part of the story. To tell that story, it doesn't need to be. That's more of a me thing,
It's a big extended metaphor with some cuts and bruises along the way.
Exactly, and a pretty nasty concussion.
Yeah, I hope they took her to the hospital.
Honestly. And for as many themes, a lot of people would think too many. I don't know if I agree with that because they all sort of revolve around this idea of growing up. But, for as many themes are in this movie, they're largely very well conveyed. Like,
Hey, when they all fell into that thing first, Natsume fell off the roof. Maybe they actually kind of managed to just barely catch her and pull her back up onto the roof, but when they did that, Juri fell back and hit her head on the back of the building. What if they all went on their journey, stuck up on the roof together while she was kind of loopy, and this is just how she remembers it?
funny theory, but I don't think so.
No, of course not. And I'm just like, hey, it's maybe she's not okay.
Oh god. But yeah, like the themes could be like, because there was so many different versions of the growing up theme in there, as well as the idea of what is home sprinkled in there as well. Don't forget the whole point of this movie is that they're drifting home. Nopo is the embodiment of home, this idea that home isn't a location, but the memories and the people who you associate with it. We don't even really touch on that because it's not the focus of the episode, but that's another big theme of the movie. Considering all the things I was trying to talk about, I think he did a pretty good job of talking about those things in a 2 hour time frame.
Yeah, it's not easy. Like those are topics that ultimately could easily warrant even individually much longer discussions. And in that way, the movie's actually quite succinct about like how thoroughly and definitively it like covers the topics and gives ideas on what they really mean, how to
Yeah,
move how to move through them and how to move forward.
they used the time they had very well. I think you know, realistically, as a story, yeah, it could have benefited from having a bit more room to stretch its wings and like properly develop every character. It would if this had been like a mini series even, or to a like short one series TV show instead of a movie, it it probably could have been a masterpiece.
What we have here is probably what the equivalent of like a 6 episode miniseries. What episodes are usually about like 20 minutes, and this was 2 hours. So yeah, I think about 6 episodes. If it had been even eight, like just another 40 minutes of time altogether for the story, or maybe like a third hour could do a lot.
Yeah, I think like a minimum of like 40 minutes is all this would have needed narratively to really really hit the mark. But it did very well with what it had. Like, it's not a perfect movie. I obviously have my complaints about it, but the things that I like about it and that I think it did well vastly outweigh that. And on that note,
Yeah.
there is one thing I nearly forgot about it that I wanted to touch on that I really liked about this movie. At the end of the movie, the kids still have a lot of room for improvement and a lot of growing up to do. They've come a long way and they've learned their lessons, but they still have that room to grow. That some people might feel that's a little contrary to the themes, but I like it a lot because these are 11-year-old children. They still have years of growing up ahead of them, and some of the lessons they have just learned are really hard to process and embody even as an adult. Like, we went on an extended bit of discussion about jury, and that's just one of them. All of the lessons we touched on are not easy to process, and that
Yeah,
you
and it
have
would
to.
actually be quite shallow if the story were to just say, okay, they spent a couple of days in the emotional maturity hyperbolic time chamber and now they're fine.
Yeah, it would have been. A lot of movies like this, they would have them come out suddenly acting way more mature or like adults even. I like that here we don't get that. We can see the progress, but they are still children, and they
They
still
have
have
solved the
plenty of
problems
room
that
to
we
grow up.
saw them solve on the screen during the course of the story organically, and that's it.
Yeah, they still, and even those problems, like they still have work to do on them. It's not perfect. Like
Yeah.
pretty much immediately, Kosuke is like sort of deflecting the significance of the experience and sort of joking it off, or like laughing it off a little bit, as opposed to properly dealing with it and We get that it's a little bit tongue in cheek that there is an understanding between him and Natsume there now, but it's a sign that he's still not quite there yet, and I like that a lot. I think it's really
Yeah,
good storytelling to show that they haven't come out of this as entirely new people. There's still room to
and we
go,
get to see
but
good
they
notes of
are.
that in the little music montage too, where
Yeah,
we're just
it's
seeing them continue to play around and go back to their lives.
exactly. It's this idea of this isn't them having grown up. This is them starting to grow up. It's coming of age in the sense of they are entering the part of their lives now where they are going to mature, which is it's a good take on it, and it's one I appreciate a lot, as opposed to
Yeah,
what a lot of stories do is be like, yep, these kids have figured all their shit out now, because no, they haven't. They're children.
they've started their next stage of life that is going to be just as turbulent, maybe in some ways even more turbulent than everything they've already been through. But what the story and what they've been through over the course of it has done for them is started off that next stage on the right foot, in a better place than they were before, and in a better place to start that journey than a lot of other less lucky people are when they get there.
Yeah, they are more prepared for that next leg of their journey where things are going to change dramatically and all that. And that's good work. That is good writing and good character work.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anything else you want to add?
Uh, no, not much. I really like the way this story touches not only on that growing up stuff and from a perspective of younger kids than we generally get to. Usually, stuff about kids that young isn't very willing to like truly face harsh realities, but also like real serious home is where the heart is vibes.
I mean, yeah, it's a big theme of the movie. We didn't, like I said earlier, we didn't really focus on that because it's not really what this cycle is about. But it's baked into the whole idea to Noppo's whole existence.
Part of growing up is having a home, letting it be important to you, but also understanding that home is not just a place. And sometimes, even when a place is home, you have to move. You have to be ready to move on. The world doesn't stop turning when you stop going with it.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's good. It's a good movie, and I recommend it to people.
Can't believe it got a 6.3 on IMDb. Tragic.
I mean, I understand why, because of again the fact that it never really explains the mystical element of it. I think that that thing that irked me probably irked a lot of other people too on this one, and a lot of people would have looked at that and gone, they haven't completed the story. I don't understand the mystery of it all, which is a valid complaint, and I get it, but it's not the point of the movie.
Not all mysteries are meant to be explained.
It's not a mystery. It's a coming of age story. It's got some fantastical elements for sure, but unpacking all that isn't what it's about. And yeah, I think 6.3 is a little harsh. Like, I don't think it's in 9 or 10 territory personally. I would have put it like somewhere in the 7 to 8 range myself.
That's about where I would put it too. Is a good movie.
Good movie. And speaking of stories about putting children through harsh realities, if you're listening to this and haven't bought my book yet, Domino, you should do that. I make lots of children miserable in it. Uh,
Yeah.
and if you're wondering where to find that book, if you're listening to this elsewhere, you can also find these podcasts on my website, radfordwrites.com, where I share assorted stories, including the ones that are written just for this podcast. I also put blog articles, reviews, that sort of thing up, and you can find links to my books there as well. You can also find John around doing more things with me for like narration and all that, but also doing the streaming thing over on Twitch as Sephia.
Yeah. We do it.
He does, in fact, do that. Well,
Do
goodbye.
big fight, yeah. Bye.